Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Swede Rolls. And with you as usual is Chris, and our previous guest back again for more Planescape.
Idran, hello.
Yeah. Yes, hi, hello. Welcome once again to Swede Rolls. Back
Thank you.
way sooner than we thought you'd be. To everyone's great pleasure, I will
I'm
add.
sure.
Yeah. I gotta say I was very happy with the Planescape episode we did. So happy, in fact, that I wanted another one where I didn't
I'm glad
interrupt
to hear
you.
it.
Oh, thank you. Where just one episode where I didn't interrupt you every 5 seconds with something completely unrelated, and the way conversations usually go. Today I posited the question to you if you wanted to go a little bit more in depth with the factions of Sigil or Sigil.
I'd love to do that.
I just did it. That would be great.
I've contaminated you.
Yep. And I'm just a dumb old, what do they call the material plane peeps again?
Clueless.
Clueless, that's the term.
Yep.
I'm just an old clueless.
Yep. Well, to give a little bit of background first, so the factions are really, from an out-of-setting perspective, they're kind of the selling point of Planescape to begin with. I mentioned last episode that one of the big selling points for Planescape, one of the lines that they used to describe it was philosophers with clubs, because it's all about people having philosophies that they're intense with and fighting with one another over which philosophy is the truth of existence.
Yeah.
So going to the inciting side of things, back some centuries before the present day in the setting, there were dozens of these factions all vying for power in Sigil, causing a lot of chaos there, until at a certain point the lady just got tired of it, so she laid down the law through her agents, and she declared no more than 15 factions. If there's any left within 24 hours or something like that, I'm going to kill all of you.
Wow. Well, that's an incentive, if any. And just going to do a little cut in here that if you have no idea what we're talking about, you're listening to this, just go back to the previous podcast and listen to the introduction to Planescape, because we don't really have time to go into who the lady is right now. We're just going to assume you know about this stuff. But yeah, I mean, 15 factions initially. Then a lot of revisions happened later on.
Some factions left, some and were destroyed or just fell apart or one reason or another. Others came in from other places. Still 15 in the present day, but a different 15 than they started out with. So the 15 we'll be talking about here are the 15 from the original release of Planescape. So there are older ones kind of in backstory as well, and there are some later ones that came about after the fact, after the end of the second edition stuff, but it's that 2e stuff that we'll be talking about.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to go into the stuff that would be relevant if you're playing Torment, for example, Planescape Torment, or if you just want to go through the basics, because the meta around Planescape is pretty thick. So they're all based in real-world philosophies, more or less, right? So which one's your favorite? Let's start with that one. Or actually, no, let's start with the one you least like.
What I least like, that's a tough, much tougher question to answer. I think I will have to settle. It's a tough one. I'm going to have to say the Mercykillers, but that's more from an in-character disliking. From the philosophy, from an external view, I kind of like the concept behind them, but as a character in Planescape, I could never stand dealing with them.
They're very black and white kind of people.
So the Mercykillers are one of the 3 factions of law in Sigil. Specifically, they're the ones charged with running the prison. And their outlook is that justice is what rules everything, that everything should be driven by justice, and those that violate justice should be brought to punishment to stop them from interfering.
Yeah, they have a very myopic view on good and bad. They believe in a universal good, or rather a universal right,
universal law,
moral
really,
right,
because they don't care so much about good or evil. They just care about law. They care about following the strictures of society, never bending from that.
They're totalitarian, pretty much, right?
Pretty much, assume, They're kind of similar to the Harmonium in some ways, which is another one we'll get into, but it's a little bit lighter about things. But the Mercykillers are very much punishment oriented. Their name specifically is what they're about. They are about killing mercy. They don't believe in it. They don't think that there's any such thing as extenuating circumstances. If you break the law, you deserve to be punished.
So in a sense, it kind of makes sense that they would be the ones doling out the punishment of prisons then.
Yep.
So
Yep.
and you can actually get an NPC, I believe, in Planescape pretty late on. I forgot his
Mm-hmm.
name. He's not super important to the story.
Valor.
Valor, yeah, and
Yep.
he's the guy you just no,
Yep.
you do his quest and then you just get rid of him.
Yep. He was a warden of the Mercykillers. So their thing, so these factions aren't just in Sigil. They're all over the plains.
Oh, yeah.
That's just where they're most concentrated. And one thing with the Mercykillers is they have these agents called wardens. They're specifically charged with going out and tracking down those people that have escaped from the law one way or another. Not just escaped criminals, but those that others aren't able to bring in. Those that have violated not just law of society, but sometimes even natural law.
Some natural law. And which is, like you said, an extremely interesting concept. Like interplanar bounty hunters, but not for money, but for justice. Which
just for the glory of following their creed.
Yeah. So in a way, they're really interesting people, which I think we're going to come back to a lot of times. That at first glance, these factions may seem very extreme or very very plain, but when you start thinking about it, they actually, if you put yourself in their the philosophical context of their worldview, they are very interesting ways of perceiving the world.
Yeah. And I do want to touch a little bit for this one and for the others on the Factols, well, the one who runs the faction as of the present day in Planescape, because there's a lot of interesting characterization there with all of them. So for the Mercykillers, it's Alison Nelesia. She's the Factal of the Mercykillers. She was only recently come to power. In fact, she's actually really young. She's only 17, and she was still able to make her play to rule the faction, basically by digging up what she saw as dirt on others that were up there and bringing them to justice. Not so much publicly. She's kind of been in recent days, as of the president of Planescape, been sort of making the Mercykillers even harsher than usual, because she's all about that aspect of them, all about making sure the criminals won't exist.
Bringing out
that's
the dirt,
her biggest thing.
Just stamping it all out wherever it appears. No matter who or what does it. So again, a very totalitarian, very philosophically. I'm not a philosophical major, so I don't know the term for it. But moral absolutism, I think it's called. Where you.
She was actually. Oh, go ahead.
No. Sorry, I'm just rambling.
I was going to say part of it for her. She was actually born in Sigil's prison. Her mother was a thief there, died in childbirth. She was raised in the prison because that's just kind of how Sigil works when something like that happens.
Perhaps.
Anyway, she tried to join the faction from a really early age. She was like 8 or so when she first tried to join. They pushed her off, and she just got so focused on joining them that it was literally all that her existence was meant for in her eyes.
Wow. And that's some dedication.
Yep.
And I think that they really exemplify dedication as well. Like, they don't stop, Mercykiller.
Exactly. They've got a set of certain tenets. And the theme of all those tenets is "We will never stop."
And their nickname is the Red Death, I read here.
Yep. And that's because of their armor, sort of the icon of them. They've got their people all wear this red plate mail covered in armored spikes, and they just put on as much of a terrifying face as they can to convince people not to break the law while they're around.
So they're essentially less moral Judge Dredd, or actually less sympathetic Judge Dredd.
Yeah, that's actually a very good comparison. Judge Dredd is a very good example of the Mercykillers. There are kind of two threads throughout the faction. There are the ones that are a little bit more towards justice as an ideal versus justice as something to be forced on. That's in part because of their background, which I won't get into here, but they are kind of pulled in two ways, and so there are some Judge Dredd types within the faction as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that covers the Mercykillers, your least favorite faction, and you're singing their high praise, so I can't imagine what your most favorite faction would be. Just a little thing here that we're probably not going to be able to cover all the factions in just one episode, so don't worry if we're not covering your favorite faction. We'll get to that in another episode, probably.
Yep. And end of the episode, I'll plug a good resource for this as well for anyone that's curious about seeing more before that episode comes out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But going from one end of the law spectrum to another, how about we talk about the Revolutionary League, the Anarchists?
All right. All right, they're another interesting one. Yeah. So they are, as the nickname says, they're anarchists. They believe that that essentially the anarchist creed, that government is something that restricts people too much, that the best way to exist is communally, that people should be able to make their own decisions without worrying about conflicts with the state. So they're really classic anarchists, literally, which is a little weird for an organization, but it just kind of works out. They aren't really so much organized hierarchically the way a lot of factions are. They're kind of more of a cell system, like a lot of more anarchist-oriented organizations are. They're split up into individual cells, no real single leader. Most anarchists, you'll never even know if you meet one, because one of their big things is disguising themselves as members of other factions to infiltrate and try to bring them down.
I seem to recall that Anna in Planescape at least says she's an anarchist.
That sounds familiar. She might have been. I don't know if she was officially a member, so getting a little bit off of specific factions, but there's kind of different levels at which you can be a member of a faction. The namers are the people that are just pulled in off the streets that aren't really intensely into the faction. They're kind of just there to have an organization to belong to. Anna might have been a namer of the anarchists. Above that, you get the factotums, which are the sort of the first real true believers of the faction. They're the ones that really buy into it.
Yeah, you can probably compare it to guilds, classical guilds, that you would have to prove yourself in some way to be accepted as a tradesman or a guildsman.
Yep, that's a very good comparison. In fact, in setting, the factions actually kind of evolved out of the guilds of Sigil.
Oh, yeah. And especially some of them are even more so than others, as we'll see later on.
Yep. Then above the factotums, you've got the factors, which are the sort of not so much middle management, a little bit above that, but they sort of run the individual day-to-day branches of factions. Then you've got the factal at the top, who runs the whole thing.
Oh yeah.
Not all the factions obey that specific structure, but most of them are pretty close to it.
Yeah, and I mean that's it's interesting that so many of them adopt a similar system, considering their differences in ideologies. But I guess maybe that's just something that arose out of convenience.
Yeah. So getting back to the Revolutionary League, so their big thing isn't so much. I guess this is going a little bit against what I said before, but it's not specifically freeing people from the strictures of the state. They believe that there's a reason to do that there's an underlying secret to existence that the existence of these governments, these organizations, these structures hide. And that unless they clear these off the board, they'll never really know the truth of how things are.
Oh, yeah.
You can only find that truth if you are free.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's always an agenda hidden somewhere about why a faction would want you to join them and things like that. And they're not entirely wrong either. So
yeah. That's one of the nice things, that none of the factions is blatantly incorrect. There's always some truth to what it is that they say about reality from a certain perspective. And so the Revolutionary League, their main thing in Sigil itself is trying to infiltrate the factions. But across the planes, they do similar things for other organizations. They try to get their people in to take them down from the outside. They're not so much about public violent action. They're all about working within the system to destroy the system.
That's interesting, because I seem to recall that a lot of revolutionaries, especially in Russia, were like professional revolutionaries who studied it in France from anarchists and took it back to Russia.
No, that's actually interesting. I wasn't familiar with that.
I seem to recall that being the case, that for a lot of the people of Russia, the revolution made very little sense. It was something that was happening in Moscow, which was, I mean, Russia was extremely decentralized at the time. You paid your taxes and that was pretty much it.
Makes sense.
So for them, the revolution was just like, okay, I have no idea what's going on. So I can imagine that, I mean, anarchists and communists do come from roughly the same movements initially.
There's a lot of overlap there. Yeah. Anarchists are kind of one step beyond communists in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. They don't believe in the. We could talk about that for hours, but we should stick there. Are there any explicitly communist factions in Planescape?
That's an interesting question. I'm trying to think about that offhand. I can't think of any that are towards that end. Most of the factions in Planescape are more oriented towards the truth of reality. Like I mentioned, the Revolutionary League, they're about governments and organizations hiding the truth of things. And the Mercykillers, they're about justice being the underlying principle of reality. But just in terms of like political perspectives in a general sense, that's not something you tend to see much.
Yeah, there's not.
Although
a
I
lot
feel
of
like
talk
you
about
might
class.
be.
Sorry.
Okay.
I mean,
I was saying I wasn't sure if you're trying to lead me towards something.
No, I was just saying that there's
Okay.
there's not a lot of talk about class and stuff like that in Planescape.
Yeah.
But I find it interesting then that they would be called Anarchists, which is specifically a political worldview. Where,
that is interesting.
Yeah. But I guess I'd also imagine that TSR would have wanted to steer away from making it political at the time, because that would just open up a whole box of, a whole can of worms you wouldn't want to deal with. Better
I mentioned this a little bit last time, but one of the big goals of Planescape was to be able to bring back the planes without bringing back the public disapproval of some of this stuff and some of the planar stuff brought up.
Yeah, so if you're gonna have commies and capitalists fighting each other, that's not gonna be a good game.
Oh, we do have capitalists though, and we'll get into them if you want.
Oh yeah, sure. Let's go. Let's go through those.
So let's talk about the Fated.
The Fated, yes.
Yeah. So the Fated are one of the two big factions in Sigil as of the present day of the meta plot in second edition. They're ruled by Duke Rowan Darkwood, and their thing is all about you deserve to have what you can hold on to and what you can take, which leads to their nickname, the Takers. They believe that strength and being able to hold on to things demonstrates your worth. That if you can't hold what you have, then you don't really have it.
Well, there you go. Now you have social Darwinism and Ayn Rand going on. So I guess I spoke too soon. Oh my god.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Not objectivism so much. They don't have a lot of the really horrible like racial aspects to it or that sort of thing, but there's a grain of it.
But it's more of a might makes right kind of
pretty much, yeah. In fact, they originally come out of Asgard. In historically within the setting, and so
actually in Nordic Scandinavian countries during the Viking era, no, I don't know about the Viking politics.
Yeah, I'm not talking about real life. I'm talking about the Planescape. Asgard.
Oh yeah, Asgard. Yeah, the ideal world. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the big things in the plane of Asgard in Planescape is sort of not exactly a might makes right philosophy, but close to it. More you need to fight for what you have, and that's the big point of the Fated, that you need to fight for what you have, and if you haven't fought for it, you don't deserve it.
Oh yeah, I remember you talked about that before. We did brush quickly on the idea that religions were imported wholesale and then just sort of fitted into the mold, I guess. Plenty can be said about that, but I do applaud the the attempt they did it. I mean, it's good if you take it as something that's in the game and not try to connect it too closely to real life. It's perfectly fine.
Yep. So within the government of Sigil, the Fated act probably kind of obviously as tax collectors.
Of course,
they serve that purpose within the government. So that's kind of an obvious commentary thing there.
Who do the taxes go to at Sigil?
It's a confusing government. The Sigil government is basically an arrangement by factions to take care of things, since the lady doesn't really want to do much beyond just keeping the city repaired. So different factions hold different roles in the government. There is a treasury for the city that all the factions are allowed to draw from for different projects and whatnot, but each faction kind of owns their own side of the government, and other factions don't really have that much.
But that's interesting. That's a nice distribution of power. I mean, I don't think the Mercykillers would ever do it, but they do hold the keys to all the prison cells, so they could potentially let everyone out.
And there's a lot of interesting political jockeying behind the scenes here. The Krieg stance is a big theme of Sigil. The ongoing war between the various factions vying for power. And like I mentioned, as of the present day meta plot, the two main power centers that everyone else just kind of orbits around are the Fated, and the second one, which I think would be my favorite, the Society of Sensation.
Oh yeah, well, you're preaching to the choir. The Sensates are the best. that's just how it is. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting then that the Fated, I can imagine that the Mercykillers could potentially be a real thorn in the side for the Fated.
You'd think, but they actually have a weird alliance because that whole thing of strength giving power kind of gets a little bit of philosophical overlap there. Because, I mean, obviously the law is determined by those that have the power to determine the law.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, there's an interesting kind of this is kind of a little bit of setting gossip there, but there's an interesting relationship between the two Factols. I misspoke earlier. Nalesia is 19, by the way, not 17. This isn't slightly as weird as it seemed, but Duke Darkwood has kind of been wooing Nalesia as part of a plan to consolidate power within the city.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, from one perspective, I guess it makes sense, but from another, I mean, if you're abusing the system, well, I guess if you only care about the law and not the idea behind the law, then
and that's the key behind those two threads I mentioned in the Mercykillers before. They've got kind of two views on what exactly it means to enforce justice.
I mean, if you're listening and you can't tell already, this is by far our favorite setting because it's so rife with these kind of things that are just plot threads waiting to happen. It's a strong meta narrative that I really cannot speak less highly about. It's one of the most impressive ones I've met.
Yep. And one of the reasons the Fae is really popular is because obviously they've got a lot of attention from adventurers going through Sigil. Because, I mean, the idea that if you kill something, you get to take its stuff is a little bit of an appeal to a lot of adventuring types.
Oh, yeah. There's been pages written on D&D economics. Economics, that's the word. God damn it.
Close. You got it.
Yeah, I got it finally. But I can imagine how it appeals to them.
Yeah, and it helps that Darkwood himself is a former adventurer. He's actually originally a Prime. He got power from fighting his way through and winning it through combat. He's one of the High Priests of Heimdall in the time of Planescape. He originally made his way fighting up through the realms, in fact. He was originally from Greyhawk, or from Orith, I should say, specifically, but some stuff happened. He got pulled to Baitor for a time, fought his way out of torture, and then he joined an adventuring party in Toril.
My god, this world is so rich. I mean, I have never touched on Greyhawk, and I did play Warforged at a time, but even then I barely knew anything about that world. It's just, there's so much to learn.
I think Warforged are actually Eberron, so they're the
Eberron,
3rd edition one.
Yeah,
Greyhawk is the one that Gygax and Arneson made for the original D&D. It was the first setting.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, I didn't even play Magpie Being from there anyway. She was from somewhere else. But they did make they did make it as a race in 4th edition too.
Oh, cool.
In the second, or I think in the second player's handbook.
So, I guess this is a good time to move on to that other faction I mentioned, the Sensates.
Absolutely. Let's go to that.
And they're all about experience. They're all about getting as many experiences in reality as they can. They believe that the multiverse can only be understood by experiencing it, by seeing it for yourself, by smelling it, by feeling it. One of my favorite examples in fiction of someone that would be a sensate is Dale Cooper from Twin Peaks.
Oh yeah, this is damn good coffee.
Exactly.
I love Dale Cooper, and it's a very fitting description of him, of the faction, I'd say. I always pictured the Sensates as being the most diverse group.
I think that's definitely reflected in the lore as well. Because they just want as much experience, as much knowledge, as much difference as they can, so that they can really know what reality is like in all of its aspects, good and bad.
Which is, I don't know why it appeals to me so strongly, but I guess in a sense they really do acknowledge the mortality of life, and that's I think that's a noble goal to try to maximize your lifespan, as it were. Yeah,
especially because a lot of places in Sigil just write them off as hedonists, but they do a lot to fight back against that. They actually specifically work. They have like a sort of therapy set up for those who get too invested in a single experience that keep going back to it again and again. Addicts in one way or another. They're all about the novelty of life.
And I can imagine that the lower ranks are probably more prone to hedonism. And you have to...
A lot of people that either fall to that or that come to the Sensates because they don't understand them. They think it's a good place to
pleasure.
get
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I read here that they're reminiscent of Epicureanism, which is, Epicurean philosophy is just taking pleasure in the now, and not troubling yourself with things you can't understand.
Exactly.
So that's very fitting. Yeah.
Yep. And that's probably one of the reasons why they conflict with the Fated so much, because the Fated are all about taking all they can. The Sensates are all about just letting it come to them. Well, or going out to find it, but they're not about taking things. They're about enjoying things.
Yeah. But it's also about proving things. I'm looking at the Wikipedia site. They actually have a page for the factions. I don't have my books available to me. But they're also talking about empiricism. That's how you pronounce that?
Empiricism. Yep. That you can only know something if you've experimented to demonstrate it.
Yeah. If it's a replicatable result.
Yep.
And replicable results, they do have a method of doing that. Isn't that right?
Yep, the sensory stones, which is something they do to record memories, experiences that their members have, so that other members that wouldn't be able to experience them for one reason or another, something that's really rare, something that was a one-time experience, something that's in the ancient past, so that those are never lost entirely.
And I think that also really contributes to the great appeal of this faction, because I think one of the strongest moments in the Planescape role-playing game and the computer game is when you actually go to the Sensates and you get to experience all these weird things.
There's two real points in Torment that I would say really call to that, and really call to what Planescape is about. And the Sensorium that you mentioned is another, but the other one is also heavily linked to the Sensates, and that's the brothel of slating intellectual lust.
That was a masterpiece.
And that's another Sensate organization, because Fall from Grace herself is a Sensate.
And that what is that essentially for those who don't know?
So that in Torment was rather than a physical brothel, it was an intellectual brothel where people would go to have conversation, where people would go to have their ideas challenged, to just have a good argument or a good fight with words, something like that.
Not necessarily. You could also just go there to have someone listen to you, or to say, you're absolutely right. I believe in everything you say.
Yep. Any kind of conversation you could imagine wanting to have, you could have there.
Yeah, you could get verbally assaulted for 50 minutes too if you wanted. I love it. I absolutely love that place.
Or you can just trade stories.
Yeah, or you can turn yourself into an armoire and,
Now, I don't think that guy was really in the Sensate point of view.
I don't think so, no. No, definitely. He's more like a chaos man than anything else.
Yeah.
Or maybe,
But they're led by Erin Montgomery. She was, I believe she was no, I'm thinking of someone else. She grew up on the Outlands. She basically had her life essentially destroyed when there was an invasion by the Blood War spilling over into the Outlands and destroying her village. I got a little bit of inspiration from her backstory for some of my Planescape stuff, you might notice.
Oh, well, I mean, the real pros, they steal, so.
Yep. But she ended up coming from that position to what's currently called, to her current nickname of the second most powerful woman in Sigil. She had a real chance of being the first person to bind the factions together just because of her outlook and because of how well liked both the Sensates and her personally were before Darkwood came to power. Now it's kind of a 50-50 split in the Hall of Speakers, which is the center of government in Sigil, between the two of them, where he's the guy that's brash, loud, trying to force everyone to come to his point of view one way or another, and she's just there letting it all flow around her and bringing up alternatives and showing that there's another lighter way to go.
So much for the tolerant Sensates,
Yeah, I might have been hinting at that a little bit. Although Darkwood, I think, is much more interesting and much more intelligent.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I again, shouldn't really. I mean, they all have aspects to them that can appeal. And I can definitely see the appeal that some people would have to the takers, as it were.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I don't want to point them as antagonists, the Takers, because there honestly is a lot of interesting stuff that you can do with that. Because they're
Oh,
not just
absolutely.
about stealing things; they're specifically, if you haven't fought for it, you don't deserve it, even if it's something that you do own. So they're also against like the old money types that just
Oh,
hold
yeah.
on to their wealth and do nothing with it. They're
Well,
strongly against that because those people haven't
yeah.
earned what they have.
I can imagine they exemplify in many ways the American dream and Scrooge McDuck
Yeah,
to a
I
certain
can see
extent.
that. Yeah,
Because Scrooge
Scrooge
McDuck.
McDuck would definitely be a faded.
Yeah, because he made all this money. He made it by being smarter than the smarties and tougher than the toughies.
Exactly.
And I mean, I used to want to be like that when I was a kid because Scrooge McDuck was cool, and he embodied the good parts of this ideal, I believe.
Yeah, yeah.
And I feel like you could, like you said, there's good in that faction too. They're not all assholes or.
Yep. Yep. Because but that, I mentioned that earlier, but that's one of the things I like about the factions. They're all gray. There's no one that's blatantly the good guys or blatantly the bad guys.
Exactly.
There's positive and negative aspects to a lot of it. I mean, even the Sensate philosophy, there's bad aspects in the idea that you can't really believe something unless you've experienced it for yourself. I mean, there's all kinds of situations in real life where that argument is just silly.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many things you can't prove, or so many things that would be impossible within your range.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very it's hard to work in terms of black and white in this setting, and I think they've really managed to pull through on that. They managed to really make it more interesting than going into dungeon and killing bad guys.
Yep. Which for a setting that's literally based on planes made out of good and evil is impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have time to do one more faction.
All right.
I can imagine we're doing 3 episodes because the rule of 3.
Sounds right. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. So let's go ahead.
That's actually a Planescape thing. I was thinking of something.
Yeah.
So why not? Let's do 5 episodes five factions per 3.
5 per episode.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go to who I think might be one of your favorites, Chris. Let's go to the Bleak Cabal.
The Bleak Cabal, indeed, and that's actually a very recent discovery on my part. I, for a very long time, found this philosophy very unappealing to me. The philosophy of nihilism. But thanks in no small part to my good friends and my wife and life, I've just come to the conclusion that you can be a nihilist and still enjoy life. And when
little bit Rick and Morty too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think Rick just. You're putting me on a spot here because I would never admit that Rick is a good person or anyone to get inspired by.
I'm thinking more Morty myself.
Oh yeah, Morty. Yeah, Morty's the vehicle for the show and the vehicle for the viewer. But the main idea is that you can't control what's happening in your life. You can't prevent accidents from happening. You can't predict the blood clot in your brain that's going to kill you in your sleep.
And some people end up Ricks with that view, and some people end up Mortys.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess I ended up on Morty. At one point, I was probably a Rick. I'm pretty sure I was a Rick at one point. But just going, okay, well then let's make the best of what we have. Let's leave this planet a bit better than when we got here.
Yeah, and that's exactly the core point of the Bleak Cabal. They express both of those perspectives of nihilism, but they are fundamentally about the multiverse not having a fundamental truth. That life is just something that you live, and then you stop living it.
Yeah, and the meaning of life is just to make what you want of it.
Yeah. They're actually one of the oldest, if not the oldest, factions in Sigil. They actually predate the huge vying for power that I mentioned at the start of the podcast. They've been around forever just because it's such a basic view that there's always been some expression of it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. It's a very old philosophy. Actually, no. Now when I think about it, it's not a very old philosophy. Is it nihilism?
Oh yeah,
nihilism
that's
is
true.
Very modern. It's when people,
it's
because all Greek philosophy was like finding the meaning of the universe, and then someone was like, well, maybe there's not.
I'm not too great with philosophy, but I want to say Nietzsche.
Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, I think, were two, and Kierkegaard, I think, are the 3 main nihilism focused or the kind of people who went, okay, so maybe there isn't a reason.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so within the city, they run the various charities for one. They do a lot of charitable drives, and they also run the city's asylum, in large part because integrated into the faction itself is actually, they don't call it by this name, but depression.
Yeah.
Depression is a common malady that their members suffer, for which makes sense. I mean, nihilism honestly can lead to that. Sometimes you can pull yourself out of it, sometimes you can't, but it's actually something that's baked into their mechanics even.
Well, that's super interesting.
They have a lot of formal factals that left not because they resigned or died, but because they felt a depression and they're being treated in the asylum as best they can for what they have.
And it's interesting, you just mentioned very briefly that they run the charities too of the city. And I think that's important to point out too, that they take care of the disenfranchised. Running an insane asylum is essentially, there's no gain in that unless you're looking at a humane gain in it. And if you're an existentialist, if you're a nihilist, then I mean you got to have some kind of positive view on things if you're actually running an asylum, because you're saying, okay, I'm going to take care of these people even though it doesn't actually matter.
Yeah. And funny thing is, a lot of outsiders of the faction see them doing this charitable stuff and don't understand why they do it based on the beliefs they have. They just assume that they're trying to find what the meaning in reality is through it, rather than understanding that there is no meaning.
They think they're studying. Better. Yeah, they think they're studying the people in the asylum, but perhaps they are, but they're also taking care of them. And it's interesting. They're definitely. I used to have a hard time breaking out of the Sensate mold. I feel when I was trying to create a character for Planescape, but after this discussion and after growing up a bit as a person, I think it's just these factions present a very good starting ground to creating a character that might not be what you'd normally play.
It's a good way to break out of that mold. Just pick a faction that seems something like you don't really jive with, and just delve into it and try and find that grain in there that makes you hooked.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, ultimately, you might come on and say, no, I can't do it, or you make one of your most memorable characters. But like you said, you got to find some grain of interest in it, and I can definitely think of some of these factions that I don't have any interest in, and that I think are shallow fools who don't understand the meaningless of existence.
Like Chaositex.
Oh God.
It's going to be fun when we get to talking about them.
Definitely.
Because I'll have to figure out something to say about them.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we end this episode, I didn't give you enough time to talk about the Bleakers that much. Like, who's their factal, for example?
They are led by a man called Lar. He was born in the slums of Sigil. He's a half orc, and he suffered a lot.
That's interesting.
He suffered a lot of discrimination and whatnot because of that. Especially because his parents were originally from the Prime, and they were actually forced out because she was an orc, because no one approved of her and of their relationship.
Wow. God, I love this faction more and more. Well, that's
so really what happened? So that, and the worst of it was, what happened was when Lar was about 12. His parents had another child, but they couldn't afford two, so they had to turn Lar over to the Gatehouse, which at the time, and it might still also serve as an orphanage.
Oh, wow.
Yep. And he's looked for his parents ever since, never been able to find them, but that was kind of what brought him to the Bleaker philosophy.
Wow.
He was brought to the Gatehouse, he grew up there, he was exposed to that idea, and he really internalized it. And he's done what he can since taking power to make things as beneficial as possible. I mentioned the depression being baked into their mechanics earlier. It's what's called the Grim Retreat in setting. What happens is in the faction, every so often they get this wave where a huge number of members of the faction will get hit with that all at once. Which I guess it's a little weird, but I guess I can kind of see the logic in it. If you see a lot of your friends falling into depression, you have a philosophy like this, that might make you more likely to.
Some kind of crisis going, like, wait a minute, what's going on here?
So... But since in the last 30 years, it hasn't happened once, and he's been doing all he can to advance the level of their ability to treat the Grim Retreat, to make people, to find ways to help people deal with it, to improve the ability of treating mental illnesses by the faction.
Well, I've always found that when any of my dwarves are struck with a fey mood, all you really need is some weird glass and crystals, and they'll make something nice out of it. Or they'll go insane and kill everyone in your fortress.
Well, you find your cures where you can.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But he's also been pushing the charitable side a lot more. That was always an aspect of them. But he's been doing a lot more to push for that, in large part because of his upbringing.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that's interesting too. I mean, if you're 12, you're at a level where you understand what your parents did to you, and you had a close relationship with them. So at that age, actually becoming charitable and not brooding on that and not becoming spiteful or hateful is a massive feat. But for someone with orcish blood in them, that's got to be even tougher. Orcs are very close to each other and very prone to rash actions generally in this game.
Less so, thankfully, in Planescape, because they try and get away from that sort of biological determinism for races in a lot of parts, but that's definitely still a cultural aspect that needs to be kept in mind.
Yeah, I think it's very cultural. And I'm very happy that they went further with their monster races, massive quotation marks, because then you get stuff like the Adventure Zone, where you have Drow working as a bartender, which in the first and second edition would have been completely unimaginable. I think even now slightly unimaginable, but hey, it's their setting, and I think it's neat.
There's also one nice bit getting back to the depression thing that really sells it. That's in the description for Lar in the thing. So one of the recent things he's been pushing is setting up a new wing in the asylum to better treat these sorts of things. He because he can feel it coming for himself. He can feel the depression building in his mind at this point. But his big goal is to be the first Factal to actually come back from that and return to his position as Factal.
Cool. I really hope he can do it. But yeah, I mean, we spent quite a bit of time on this, the Bleak Cabal here, and for good reason. It's one of the good ones. I think, for example, the Anarchists, harder to pin down, really. Obviously. But these are 5 of, I think, the stronger. I don't know about the Anarchists. They're at least not organized. But we did the Mercykillers, the Faded.
5 of the ones that are kind of easier to describe, I'd say.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can't wait until we get to the Dustmen. That's I still don't get it. I don't get the philosophy. I don't.
I'll see if I can help you through that.
I hope you can, because for me it's I don't get it. All right. I'd like to thank you again, Idran. You have provided some very insightful discussion about these different factions. I've learned a lot. And
I'd say if people want to learn more, I gave a plug for book before, so I'll do it again this time. Check out the Factols Manifesto. You should be able to get the PDFs at Drive Through RPG or any other site that sells them. I believe they're all for sale there. So definitely check this out if you want to see more about the factions before we get to our next episode.
Factols Manifesto. I think I'm gonna read it. I think I'm gonna go get it. I don't have the time to read it, but I'm gonna get it. God. And to any of you out there, if you want to just experience this setting, you don't have anyone to play with, I so wholeheartedly recommend again playing Planescape Torment.
Yes,
it
definitely.
really pushed the boundaries on text-based on text-heavy role playing. It's a bit of a wall to get into, but it's so good. It's so good. You genuinely leave it a different person. You stop when you're done with the game. You have probably thought a lot about yourself and your life choices.
Very, very true.
And you might turn out to be a Rick, or you might turn out to be a Morty. But all I'm saying is nihilism. That's the way to go.
Just don't be a Jerry.
Yeah, don't be a Jerry. Don't be, I have so many things to say on this subject, but we'll leave it at that. Don't be a Jerry, everyone. And until next time, keep rolling.
Keep rolling.
Thank you for listening to Swede Rolls. Your support means the world to us. The music you heard playing at the start and the end of this episode is Fireside Tales by Darren Curtis. The intent of this podcast is to discuss themes and issues in all manner of gaming, but primarily focused on the RPG genre. If you have any comments or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Pay us a visit at swederolls.com, where you can also learn about the people doing this podcast and more. For our Let's Play channel, check us out at youtube.com/Swede_Fighters. And until next time, keep rolling.